Mr. Reading, Mr. Barber, dear speakers, distinguished guests, I'm deeply honored to welcome you on behalf of the City of Venice and of its mayor, Luigi Brugnaro. We are gratified to attend this summit, and I believe that the historical role as a luxury trading center made Venice an interesting place from which to examine disruption in the luxury field together with the greatest expert of this business area. We all consider the Financial Times as one of the strongest voices in the journalistic scene, and we thank you for choosing once again Venice as a place to discuss the evolution in the luxury sector and its market. In the last days, an article of the Financial Times regarding the political situation in Italy and the premiership has sparked an important debate. You wrote about modern barbarians messing at the gates of Rome. So it's a strong statement, and I need to reassure you. Even in the darkest period, after the fall of the Roman Empire, Venice has grown as a safe haven, cradle of artistic and cultural beauties. For 1,000 years, Venice has been a physical and cultural wall against the barbarians, from north to south, from east to west. So, even if new barbarian invasions are coming, I'm joking of course, here you are safe. And as a matter of fact, I'm quite sure that we'll be able to see each other once again, maybe next year in Venice. Jokes aside, Venice and luxury, 1,000 years bond. The most precious production in the history of the world were born here. Fabrics, glass, jewelry, mosaics, paintings, perfumes, spices, laces, kings and queens, sultan and conquerors competed to own or wear our creation. Even today, in Venice, there are artisans and companies that design and produce wonders. And I would like to thank the Financial Times for dedicating one of the summit sessions to Venice and luxury renaissance, with some of our best luxury ambassadors. Uniqueness, exclusivity, quality, history, tradition, poetry, wonder, surprise, colors, smells, preciousness, craftsmanship, research, innovation, originality, openness, art, strength and fragility. This is Venice, this is luxury. Thank you all.
Thank you, Simone. What a pleasure it is to be back here in this magical setting in Venice for this Business of Luxury Summit. I say this because this is the preeminent luxury conference, I believe, and we have a gala of wonderful speakers, starting with Catherine Hamnett in a minute. But, Mr. Deputy Mayor, you referred to the editorial which was written last week about, in jest, about the modern barbarians entering Rome. And I want to reveal to you this morning that we will publish a letter later today from Professor Renato Giardini, teacher of anthropology and doctor in human sciences and philosophy. And I will just quote the opening because it's what makes being editor of the Financial Times such fun. Direttore, following the article which appeared in your newspaper, Italy opens gates to the modern barbarians, I remind you that you are the heirs of the tribes of the Britons defeated by Julius Caesar. In the 1st century BC, with this article, you insulted 18 million Italians who have legitimized this government. The Roman Empire was the most shining example of juridical civilization in the world, and you have on your faces the genetic traits of ancient barbarians. Well, I won't go any further, but I would just, with my old friend from Brussels from 25 years ago, Mario Monti, he knows that we're committed Europeans, and he knows, look, it's fine. The government will be fine without fear or favor, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Maybe the government won't be fine, but I don't know. Anyway, we'll talk about this. Please welcome on stage, in conversation with me, Catherine Hamnett, the icon, one of the great icons of the fashion industry. Thank you.
you very much.
Catherine,
Sweet.
you were talking to me last night about the origins of the word luxury.
Well, I just thought, there's two words that really annoy me. One of them is disruption, and the other one is luxury. So I thought we'd check out the etymological root of luxury, and it came up as lust. So I thought that's very disruptive. Lust, decadence, debauchery, it just went on and on and on, and not really what we think of it as today. I suppose excess was the thing that came up.
Well, how do you think luxury went from lust to glamour?
Well, it kind of went from the physical to the material. They were trying to explain it, but it seemed to be kind of quite a hard link to follow. But yes, now it means kind of excess, gorgeousness. I think it went from sort of people's luxurious beds to where they were committing adultery to everything that was gorgeous about life, I guess.
It's a little bit early in the morning for this.
I know, I'm dying.
Let just remind the audience what happened. It was 1969 when you set up your own fashion business.
Well, actually, I went into business straight after college. I was
with
at
the T-shirt,
21,
yes.
But that was an experience. And 79, we launched Catherine Hamnet London. I've never actually wanted to be a boss, but I was doing a freelance job, and they didn't pay, or they weren't going to pay. So I thought, well, I've got 17 garments. I'm going to make them in something and sell them, and the business kind of flew from there. So from sort of 79 to 84, we were doubling our turnover every season. So from sort of borrowed 500 quid from a biscuit queen.
That's how you started.
This is
you got
how we started.
£500 loan.
Yes.
You are the epitome of the small businesswoman.
Well, it went small business to quite a large
To a
business.
large business.
Yeah. But I suppose I'm a very practical entrepreneur, and it's about keeping your overheads down and your profits up.
We'll come to the profits. Just tell me one. I was very struck. How was it that you had a £100 million turnover in Japan?
Well, Japan is huge. It's the biggest consumer of world fashion.
Yeah.
And we had an agent in Japan. We did incredibly well, and then we went into licensing. And so we had 16 licenses. There, 16 or 17 that sort of covered menswear, womenswear, accessories. We did watches, which was such fun. We used to get 2 million a year from royalty from the watches alone, which was, represents
Good
quite
money.
a turnover. And I think it worked because I am a perfectionist. This poor Japanese guy came over for approval on the watches. And the magic of licensing for anybody is you've got designers. You have to keep your approval calls, and it's got to be like a guillotine. He came over, and I said, well, actually, these watches are 0.3 of a millimeter too thick on the casing of the metal. Take them back to Japan and do it again. He was so cross. Smoke was coming out of every orifice. But took them back, fixed them, and, it went from there. So
That's the kind of attention to detail. Now,
you have to.
we've got to talk about this picture because this sort of sums up my image of Catherine Hamnet. Here you are with Mrs. Thatcher.
Yeah, I suppose that's my kind of founder member, fashion activist selfie, really.
Yeah, it is an early selfie. What were you talking about to the Prime Minister?
Well, I didn't really care because I hated her and thought she'd been really, really bad for Britain on so
still
many
think
levels. That? Yeah, I think she's dreadful. I think she destroyed education, sold off the oil, for nothing, just took us nowhere. I just was actually it was a photo opportunity. I wasn't going to go.
Right.
But then that afternoon I thought, you can't miss this is ridiculous. And so we made the T-shirt that afternoon in the studio. If you actually see the T-shirt itself, it's hideous because you couldn't kind of do quick printing. We had to photographic linen stitched onto a silk T-shirt. But you know, the Metropolitan Museum and the Museum of Modern Art in New York are both after it. So I was hoping to start bidding more at some point, except they don't bid. You have to give them offers. So, yes, I was using we were getting a huge amount of press coverage, not just for T-shirts, but actually for clothing, and it was selling like crazy. We're doing like 700 of the top retail outlets in the world. And we're getting more publicity than we would ever needed to sell the clothes. So I thought, well, and we're also getting copied. So I thought, what would be amazing if people copied it? And it was huge ethical, environmental, social messages about issues that needed addressing.
But why
on
did you,
T-shirts.
what was the original impulse for the, if you like, the political T-shirt? And that you thought you could make money out of it?
I didn't think I'd make money out of it. We were making a huge amount of money out of clothes. I didn't care if didn't sell. I just actually felt that I didn't have a voice under Thatcher's Britain. Democracy had just trickled through our fingers. You'd got the sort of dissemination of cruise and Pershing missiles across Europe without any input from the electorate, who'd be the ones who would actually get the retaliation if they went off. And I thought, this is completely wrong. And I can't bear it. And even if I just have one photograph, you know, of me wearing a T-shirt, saying,
we'll come to that T-shirt.
oh, this is
in a
another
minute.
one. Yes,
yeah,
sorry.
We'll come to that in a minute.
Another very pressing
Yeah,
issue.
it's very
that
it's
he's addressing, yes.
low key, Catherine, low key. So we'll come to that. So you never actually thought you were going to make money out of political
No,
T-shirts?
you don't make money out of them. I mean, how many times do you wear a white T-shirt? Maybe 200 times. How many times do you wear a political T-shirt? Like once. It wasn't a money-making.
Right.
It was a kind of pro bono, really.
Right.
Like, let's use the voice that we have and the platform, the voice I have and the platform that I have as a fashion designer to put out things that need to be talked about. It's
And
a kind
then-
of sideline, charitable sideline.
Right, loss leader sort of thing. So here your
What are you
business,
doing?
your business is going like this, a bit like a Pershing missile, really. But anyway, it was going up and up and up, and then one day, you said enough. I'm shutting down.
Well, it wasn't as kind of simple as that. I'd always been
I'm a
interested.
journalist.
Okay, you like to, but yeah. So cut the copy.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try and make it concise. I'd always been very interested in Buddhism from the early 80s. My sister was sort of the family genius, and she said, "Oh, you've got to really check this out." And it is good. It's very helpful advice. It's like Christianity, but more detailed. Things like anger is hell. Best thing to do with resentment is forget it. And one of the things they talk about is right livelihood, how you should, you know, to be a decent human being, you take the Eightfold Path, and one of them, you know, on top of right action is earning your living without doing, you know, any harm to any living thing and for the good of all living things. And I thought, well, yeah, I kind of was bored with success. It was too easy.
Yeah, success
Everything
is
we
so
did was,
boring, isn't it?
It was
Yeah.
so boring.
Yeah.
And I thought I'll just check to make sure that we are in line with right livelihood, which we simply have to be. So I commissioned some research on the impact of the clothing and textile industry, environmentally and socially, thinking we find absolutely nothing wrong, and kaboom.
Kaboom.
Up to my neck in a living nightmare. Environmental degradation on an unbelievable level, from cotton agriculture, which is 12% of world agriculture, pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, contaminating the aquifer, microbiological death, desertification, even migration from Africa to Europe because farmers were giving up farming because of the high cost of the pesticides that were cheated out of their cotton, and you know they'd be dying on the way and drowning in the ocean. You know, 37 million people in the garmenting side working in conditions.
This
worse
is
than slavery.
1989 or
Yeah,
1989?
1989.
Exactly right.
So
All of the Berlin Wall.
it got quite a
And-
lot, yeah.
yeah.
And so I thought, well, I've got to fix this. And I thought, I'll just tell the industry. I did actually a talk in New York saying this is an untenable situation. I thought, everybody's saying, gosh, that's really frightful. We're going to change everything now. Forget it.
Right.
Just forget it.
Who did you tell in New York?
Well, it was a big
conference?
It's a big conference.
Bit-
so
bit
there
like
was
this?
everybody, yeah, but more people.
More people,
Yeah, more
right,
people.
yeah.
UN building.
Yeah.
It was like really,
Yeah.
yeah. It was very glam. And then, there's a little write-up in Women's Wear Daily about, Catherine Hamlin says this is an untenable situation. But I honestly thought people would agree, and, well, they didn't. I had even problems within my own company. I said, we have to change everything, every single process, every single raw material, leather, nylon, polyester, acrylic, even cashmere. These have got huge problems associated with them, which are actually destroying the planet. So I tried, but basically failed or tore up contracts as I went. And then, 2003, I went to Mali with Oxfam to highlight the plight of the cotton farmers before Cancun, and that really did it for me. I was interviewing farmers' wives who'd lost 2 babies at the breast because they're starving. The farmers were forced to sign contracts with for pesticide before they could get a contract for their cotton. If the crop failed, the banks would foreclose on them, and they take their tools and bicycles. They become migrants. They were tricked. The farmers' representatives would be tricked into selling the cotton, annual price, a very low deal. The French people, not good in Africa, used to fly the farmers' representatives to Paris, the people who'd never seen a plane close to before, get them drunk, and then get them to sign contracts at way below, the actual rate. So I just thought, I can't do this anymore. I have to help these farmers. It's just an impossible situation. Everybody talks about garment workers, but nobody's talking about people who actually grow cotton, which is, 50% of the fibers that we wear as cotton, and it's a global catastrophe what is actually going on.
Were you ostracized from the fashion industry for speaking out?
Well, I think I was probably quite ostracized to start off with. When I did get a message, I wasn't invited to Downing Street again, let's put it that way.
Not even by Tony Blair?
Well, I wouldn't have gone. I did a Jail Tony T-shirt, which I was really pleased with. I don't think he was my best friend. I think it was actually, I did a catwalk it, and it was, I think the show was on Friday or Saturday, and friend's dad was at Chequers having lunch that day, and the newspapers, I'd got the front page of every newspaper. He launched an investigation into my financial affairs.
Is that right?
Yeah, thank God. I've been squeaky all my life, because they would have found anything. They went back to 1983.
But going back about being ostracized, did you have anybody that you could talk to who had a similar view in the fashion industry? Or
no, people were pretty
you were
unkeen. I'd go to people I'd be buying 100,000 meters off of bull denim and say, I need organic cotton. They say, why should we do it since you are the only one asking for it? And I thought that was a bit disappointing. I was pretty disappointed with the other designers as well, because we had PR'd this out big time, and I thought we could have done with a bit more support on this issue. It's like nobody cares. So
no designer? You didn't find one designer to help?
in the beginning, there were a very few. There would be big companies like Nike who would send in representatives to organic exchange meetings, but nothing would really happen. The big brands really want business as usual, and they still do. I mean, there's been incidences. I was told by somebody from the Chinese government that big brands had actually told them they didn't want them to improve their human rights because it would put the cost of making clothes up, which is pretty shocking. So I tried to wanted to drive demand for organic cotton.
But where do you think we are now in terms
I think
of do you think you've made any inroads in terms of the sustainability debate?
Oh, not enough. I mean, I think world cotton
Some?
is about 2% is organic. The rest of it is conventional. I mean, to be disruptive, I think that if you look at the impact of the clothing and textile industry environmentally, and you look at things like climate change, global warming, the industry, there's three things that you have to do: is clothe yourself, feed yourself, shelter yourself. Clothing industry is not going to go away. We need to reinvent it from scratch because we're destroying the planet.
Do you find you can get an audience in any of the large fashion houses? Or
no, I've given up on that. I've given up on that. I think what we actually need, we need clothing manufacturing in our industrialized economies, in our developed economies. We need them in the developing world because they're usually the third or fourth largest industry. They're a huge employer. We need the jobs, we need the exchequer, and we need to have clothes made locally. What I think we need is we need legislation. We need pan-European, for instance, or pan-economic bloc legislation, which says only goods made to the same standards that are upheld within our economic bloc, made outside, are allowed in, and we need to enforce our environmental laws. We need to force our employment laws rigorously across Europe, which isn't happening right now, as you revealed the other day.
In a very important article written by our employment correspondent, award-winning Sarah O'Connor, wrote about the garment industry in Leicester, where employers are systematically flouting the minimum wage law. It's an amazing piece of journalism. It took 4 months to do. So I support what you're saying there.
I mean, people say there'd be more human rights, as many human rights violations in clothing manufacturing as Birmingham, as in Bangladesh. And this has got to stop. And also Prato in Italy. I mean, there's a scandal going on there with Chinese workers. The whole kind of immigration issue, they cast a blind eye. One dies, another one pops up with the same name.
Right.
And it's, sorry.
Well, I'm conscious of time, and I just wanted to make sure we could depress the audience a bit further but by talking about Brexit. Why? Well, first of all, why are you so upset by Brexit?
Well, people say, it's the economics, stupid. Give me one good reason. Give me one good economic reason that Brexit makes sense. I mean, it's a catastrophe for the clothing industry because we need free movement of people, we need free movement of goods, we need the single market. Europe is 22 miles away, which is 36 kilometers or something from Britain. Why shouldn't we adore the fact that we've got the richest economic bloc in the world right next door to us, who are at the same time, as we speak, negotiating a free trade deal with Japan so that goods could be, it helps us sell to Japan, which are the hugest consumers. We need to be in Europe. I mean, there were surveys from the new APPG roundtable, fashion and textiles, APPG, which is just set up, and it's like 91% of the members of people in the clothing industry think that leaving this single market will be a bad thing. I mean, utterly opposed to Brexit. And I've got a quote from Jeremy Corbyn, actually, who's a bit unpopular at the moment because he's taken a very weak stand. But he said the only thing that affects politicians' behaviour is something that threatens their ability to get elected. So on the back of this T-shirt,
You can stand up if you
I
like.
would show you, I mean, you probably won't be able to read it, but you've got all the instructions on what to do, because I think marches and demonstrations have been great, and they give us a feeling of, oneness, but they've actually achieved very little considering the amount of time and that they've been going on, the amount of people that are involved. We need to up our game, and we need to put pressure on elected representatives saying, you're paid to represent our views, not take decisions on our behalf. We don't want Brexit.
Did you? I didn't see you during the campaign very much, but did David Cameron not give you a call and say you could be rather useful?
I think they were terrified of me, quite honestly, at number 10. Yeah. I'm always out there yelling about something or other. And, maybe, they sort of think best left alone. They just they're terrified of the T-shirts. I've actually got a law. I've got my own personal T-shirt law. Is it under the Prevention of Terrorism Act?
Really?
Said you're not allowed to make a contentious political T-shirt or wear one. So if I did something like Free Tibet, I could effectively in principle, go to jail.
Yeah, certainly in China if you were...
Well, we won't go down very well, would it? No, I don't actually dare go to China because I've done lots of sanctioned China in subsequence on models' naked nipples because I thought its impact, both the picture editors, usually men, so thought that would get a nice lot of coverage. So yeah, not risking China.
We've just got time to just talk about your new venture, because you're starting up again in a big way.
Yeah, we actually, Brexit, since it was a clean, rather, clean slate, I thought, well, we've got possibly Brexit coming up. So we've actually Brexited early. So it's great to be here because we've set up a production company, Italian production company in Treviso, which is about 20 miles away. And we're doing our manufacturing and our logistics from there because I refuse to be constrained by this nightmare, which seems to be chundering along to the point that, you know, unbelievably, it might happen. And so, you know, it's ethically produced in Italy and in Europe, the highest sustainable standards.
Why did you choose Treviso?
Well, I've worked in this is a kind of a centre of the clothing industry. I've worked in this area for about the last 40 years. And there's a huge amount of skills and factories around here, so it's a good place to do, and it's near the airport.
Right.
You know, it's like the airport's actually in the town, so it's kind of really nippy, huge, skill resources surrounding it. And we hopefully in a year or so will be able to be, you know, the ethical and sustainable sourcing centre for Europe, that we can be able to take on other people's work as well, you know, along those criteria. And that's the way it's going. People say, you know, you have to go sustainable or lose your business. We blanked out.
So we have a couple of questions from the audience. Which political slogan T-shirts you've made have had the biggest impact? And are there any that you had no impact?
Well, I did things like Leaders Suck. Didn't go very far.
Leaders Suck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I actually...
I can't imagine why that didn't have any impact.
Direct democracy. Bring Back God has been quite popular.
Yeah.
So I really hate the fact we're not allowed to believe in God. I think only idiots can't think that can't get anywhere staring dirty water around. Life's not going to come out. One of the exciting ones that we did is actually gave it away to a beautiful organisation called Help Refugees, and it was Choose Love. Of course, I'm so short-sighted I can't even see that's the Council Brexit site, but never mind. Choose Love has gone mega. We gave it to them. They were using a little printer from the Isle of Wight. ASOS, who are a big online store, picked it up and said, we'd really like to do this. And I said, well, you've got to do it on the same condition I did. You make no money out of it at all. Anyway, they're doing it. They're making $18,000 a month for the refugees. They're not touching a penny. It's a completely new business model. You know, everybody's wearing it. It's like festival thing coming up. So that, I think, is a really good thing to be reminded of, because I think in life, you know, it's like I've got some idiot at the office who's completely fucked up something. I want to go and kill them. I say, no. No killing today, choose love. You know, train them up so that they do it right next time, so they learn. You know, what is it? Teaching is the highest human activity. And I think it's a very good thing to be reminded of in everything we do. And so I'm really excited about that one, because for me it kind of ticks all the boxes. I think we're planning some wellies with ASOS, and will actually, as you walk, it'll write Choose Love in your footprints on the sand or in the mud, or, you know, on the wet pavement. And I love it that these T-shirts now got to the point when they've actually started talking. Right. So,
Choose Love. I can't wait to use that slogan to colleagues in the newsroom.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, shut your face, choose love, something like that.
So how do you come up with the slogan yourself? Is it you, or do you have a group?
No, it's just me. And they kind of cry from the heart, really, I think. But I seem to be good at three-liners, you know.
So just to close out, if you think back just over the years, what would you say was your biggest disappointment?
I suppose the fact that people weren't as horrified as I was of what was actually happening in the clothing industry. I mean, here we are in sort of the glittery surface, the glitter on top of the cherry, on top of the icing, but actually underneath it, it's a foul cesspit, it's a prison, it's a hell.
Right.
And the fact that people haven't reacted to that in the way that I think that they should, the sort of moral sort of lassitude of the industry, I think that's really sad. And I feel then, you know, the industry, as far as I'm concerned, is fair game.
And one last question. What was the biggest high? The biggest moment when you said yes?
Oh, kind of lovely things when we went to Paris and we didn't have the money to get back. was on a kind of stolen stand at the Pret-a-Porter, and we were launching Catherine Hamnet London, and I'd interview people. I wouldn't let them in. I would stand on the outside and say, well, I don't know if you're good enough for this. What brands do you sell? And they said, like, ugh. And so I said, okay, well, you could come in and have a look. And they said, we like this. And I said, well, of course, you know, it's pro forma only. And nobody said no. And we got the money to get home, and we started the business. It was magic.
Fantastic. Couple of questions from the audience for Catherine Hamnet. Anybody?
It must have been really boring.
No, I'm sure there aren't. I mean, what?
Nope, that's it.
That's it. I can't believe. Do you know you've done a great job in just.
What, sending everybody to sleep?
No, they're not asleep. They're sitting on their edge. You know, Martin Wolf here. Martin's got a question.
No, it can't be closed down because we need clothes. You know, imagine if we were sitting here naked, it would be ridiculous. You know, so we have to reinvent the industry.
And all the rest of we could just
Well,
have
you
that.
got 50
And
frocks.
How many do you have?
Well, exactly. We need what we, you know.
Mao
what-
had the
what
idea
is
that we should all wear the same outfit. I can still remember it very well. It would
no,
remove,
I
it would remove
no,
the
I love,
agony.
Don't make any mistake. I adore fashion. I love clothes. I love artifacts. I love, you know, all of that. And we need it, but we just need to make it differently. We need to make it a way where the, you know, the cost of fashion is not being paid in environmental destruction and human suffering. I mean, that's the point I've been trying to make for the last 20 minutes. Sorry, but there is a different way of doing things, you know, and we need to examine the processes. We need to examine, you know, how do we process wool from sheep, you know, and where are sheep grazing? Because they're, you know, they're a major cause of desertification in some areas, as are Kashmir goats. We need to really rethink the whole thing. If we're going to have a planet to live on, you know, if we're going to have a planet to wear our clothes on, the clothing textile industry is hugely destructive to the environment in ways that are not ever, seem to me, addressed at any of these ridiculous conferences, not this one.
Be careful.
Not this one, but, you know, like the G8 or whatever, went there, and it was just, you know, people just want to drink champagne. They just don't give a shit. So...
Right. That's what's called blowback. Catherine Hamnet, thank you very much for that very interesting exercise in shock therapy.
Well,
But
thank
it was
you for
a
having me.
great pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Martin Wolf, the chief economics commentator of the Financial Times, and Mario Monti, former Prime Minister of Italy, European Commissioner, to talk about the state of the world. Thank you.
So it's a great pleasure to be back here in Venice, particularly. And I was thinking normally this is the most pessimistic session of the conference, but I think that there's a pretty good chance it won't be after what we've just heard. So since I don't think we're going to be talking about the end of the planet, though I'm happy to talk about some of it. So I'm here this year, and it's working out unbelievably well. I thought it would be good to have a discussion of both politics and economics, and since it was in Italy, I couldn't imagine anyone better to talk to about it than Mario Monti, who of course was Prime Minister during the period between 2011 and 2013 at the height of the debt crisis, and we'll come in a second to whether we're about to start another one. Just a few minutes ago, you showed me the what's been happening to the spreads on Italian debt, and it doesn't look great, so we'll come to that in a second.
That was a few minutes ago.
Yes,
Went up a bit.
yes, just a few minutes ago. So before we go to our conversation, let me just sort of give as I've done in the past, a very, very brief introduction to what I think is going on. We'll talk then for about half an hour, and then you will be given the opportunity to ask questions or make comments. So first, we are in the middle of a reasonable global recovery, as I suspect many of you have experienced. It's synchronized. It's been going on now for well over a year. Really started in 2016, late 2016, early 2017. There are very few economies now, there are certainly no large ones which aren't at least growing, including some of the ones that were worst hit, like, for example, Brazil. Growth this year in the world economy at market price is expected to be about 3.4%, which is much higher than it has been since about 2010. Growth is led, as always, by Asia. Asia is growing about twice as fast as the rest of the world economy. Every year, the Asian economies get more important and the rest of the world gets less important. And that, I suspect, will continue. The differences are very, very large. Asia is growing about 3 times as fast as the developed countries. There's a recent weakening in the Eurozone, but the Eurozone has been doing particularly well. And among the larger economies in the world, of the developed world, the weakest in performance at the moment are the UK, for reasons which have already been discussed implicitly, Brexit, Italy and Japan. And the recovery is clearly the product, in large measure, of an extraordinarily extended period of extraordinarily aggressive monetary policy, of the likes we've really never seen before in world economic history. That then leads us to the question, well, what's going to come next? And here are some of the obvious risks that we should be thinking about. One is, will productivity itself rebound? We've been in a period in the developed world, above all, of unbelievably low productivity growth. In fact, the lowest sustained growth on productivity that has happened since the Second World War. In fact, almost certainly since well before the Second World War. Is that going to remain like that, or is it going to improve? There are really big questions relating to the stability of inflation as unemployment falls. Will inflation suddenly pick up? We have an incredibly aggressive US fiscal policy. I've just read a paper by Goldman Sachs that suggests that on current projections, US fiscal deficits will, without changing policy, hit 7% of GDP, structural 7% of GDP over the next 7-8 years or so. That's likely to mean higher real interest rates. So we've got to have higher nominal rates and higher real rates, and long-term interest rates remain incredibly low. The 30-year rates, 30-year conventional bonds in developed countries, the major developed countries, are sort of 3% or less. So if interest rates start rising, these could be 5 or 6%, that will be quite normal. And this then links with the fact that we have very high debt levels, and debt has really not been reduced at all. And then final economic risks is protection, and you've all been reading about trade war possibilities, and there are sort of daily updates, above all on the US-China relationship. And then the final big set of risks, of course, of which we can only be too aware here, and in Britain, in America, across the world, are geopolitical. We have an upsurge in populism, a rejection of the conventional way of doing things in many, many countries. The Brexit was an indication, the election of Mr. Trump was another indication, and of course the outcome of the Italian election was a very important third. We have, therefore, a profound loss of confidence in conventional policy making in the West, and we have a US which is pretty well indifferent to the post-war system it itself created, if not outright hostile to it, on many different fronts. And beyond that, very importantly, the relationship between China and the US, the two greatest powers in the world, is becoming fraught on many levels. And finally, since we're in Europe, of course, what's happening in Italy and in the rest of Europe raises questions of whether we can have a new Eurozone crisis. So this is, the good news is the economy is great, and the bad news is there are all sorts of reasons for believing it might not last. So let's start, if I may, Mario, with Italy. What's going to happen next in Italy? And will this government, in the end, leave the euro?
Don't be that direct. I will take several seconds to run all the avenue that you put in front of us. But I think we should borrow from the title of this summit, Luxury Disruption. I'm serious about this, because indeed this political evolution in Italy might bring at least some disruption. But we have the luxury of choice, because it could be either an early preview of an unknown future, possibly extensible to other countries in the future, or else a nostalgic return to the past, not as far back as to actually see the barbarians. Although some highly cultivated descendants of the barbarians actually are here, as Lionel Barber acknowledged, even if he fell short of reminding us of the obvious, namely that the lineage tracing him, Lionel, back to the barbarians is quite pure indeed, as shown by his family name, from barbarians to barbar, a modern contraction of that. Not to speak of his first name, clearly reminiscent of those wild beasts living with the barbarians. Actually, wolf is marginally more reassuring than lions in that respect. It could be a...
His ancestors just used to shave people. I'm sure they didn't rape and pillage.
It could be a grand coalition of two opposite populisms in a sort of government of national unity in the reverse, because the League is a populism marked by the instincts and ideals of the right, strong national and local identity, a lot of closure. The Five Star is more a left idealistic sort of populism, implying a much greater role for the state as a welfare mechanism, whereas the League, closer to the small and medium companies of northern and northeastern Italy, wants less state and less welfare invasion and migrants invasion. So the public finance implication of this could be additive, because they have two different sets of demands, including with financial implications. The League wants a flat tax. The Five Star want an extensive system of citizenship income. It's not that by getting one on board, you can satisfy also the requests of the other to some extent. So their demands on the budget are going to be very, very, very relevant. And it remains to be seen what the coherence will be in the running of government. By the way, today, according to the rumors, a new prime minister might be lining up, a professor. After all the polemics of the combined populist parties against prime ministers not elected by the people, we would have a professor, plus other moderating features coming from the moral suasion of the President of the Republic, who did a great job. In the Italian press recently, there were tough criticisms of President Mattarella for taking such a long time, for being so patient. I beg to differ and to agree with the President. Suppose that he put them in a much greater hurry. At the next elections in 5, 6, 7 months, and because they took too much time, he might have told them, well, in the meantime, here is a temporary government of my own choice. They would have gone to the next election saying, we won a majority of the popular vote, but we were prevented from forming a government. That would have doubled their consensus. So I think President Mattarella was very shrewd. That was only possible because, you mentioned quantitative easing, because now we live all in a climate of financial anesthetics, so that the spread, the interest rates, although they are going up a bit, do not resemble in the least to the dramatic situation of 2011, when President Napolitano had a few hours available to make a choice. Another possible interpretation is that this is a nostalgic, even archaic, maybe unaware attempt to go back to an earlier world, simply pre-monetary union, but even pre-globalization, because on the monetary union there is some disguised contestation of the euro, but not really a fully fledged project on how a country like Italy could find a better life out of the euro, which I think it could not. And also, in a sense, pre-globalization, because there is no reflection at all on how to increase, for example, total factor productivity for Italy, which is the key if we are to increase our growth rate and our employment. So, interesting experiment, not necessarily bound to be a disaster. It will be followed very carefully by the markets, of course, but also some parts of the Italian establishment, beginning from the President of the Republic, but the Financial Times will have many, many, many articles and editorials to write on it.
I was thinking as you were talking about, at the end, you see, your view is that things won't change so much, and they're even going to have a new Prime Minister who's a professor. There's a very, very famous quote, unfortunately I don't know it in Italian, though I should, from De Lampedusa's great book, that everything must change if everything is to stay the same. So is that essentially what you're saying?
Not that far, for sure. Not that far, no.
So let's just push before we move on to Europe. You presented the idea that this union, this strange union of populists, will be contained, or is likely to be contained, I think. Now let's assume it isn't. That, in fact, the combination of the two leads to a very large expansion in the fiscal deficit, a head-on clash with the rules of the Eurozone system, a significant, really significant rise in bond yields, and I think we can see signs of this already, pretty significant flight of money of Italians out of Italy and foreigners as well. You're seeing some of this in the Target 2 balances, where Italy has become a giant debtor again. This could lead to a pretty big Eurozone crisis, couldn't it?
It could, but relative to 2011, when in fact Italy, after the almost debacle of Greece, risked provoking a decisive and final crisis in the Eurozone, many circumstances are not there any longer. One is that, after all, the EU governance of the Eurozone has considerably improved in a patchwork way, but little by little, the Eurozone is better defended. Secondly, the problem now would be localized essentially in Italy, if it ever manifested itself. And thirdly, I think the European Union would make its rules respected if it were a problem of large deviations. So more than fearing a disruption in the sense of big deficit with big violations of the rules, I look to a situation where Europe will finally show that it exists, will enforce to some extent the rules, which will be a blessing for the coalition of the two populists, because they will be able to purify themselves from a portion of totally irresponsible electoral promises by saying, we would have been ready, but the bad European Union prevented us to do so, which shows once again the extremely helpful but ambiguous role of the EU of acting, I'm convinced, for the good of its member states, but in modalities which, if used cynically by politicians, can further and further enlarge the gap between the public opinion and the EU.
I mean, what you're describing is really a sort of Italian version of what happened in Greece when Tsipras was elected. I'm not saying it's bad, it was quite a mess, but in the end, after being elected to break out of the chains imposed upon Greece by the Eurozone, Tsipras accepted everything. Now, let's suppose that happens, then the electorate are going to feel profoundly cheated, aren't they? They're going to say, we finally voted against the establishment, people like you, and political leaders who followed the European rules. We thought we would get something different at last, and they will discover that this election meant absolutely nothing. They will end up with exactly the same policies they started with. Isn't that, in the long run, as you yourself implied, democracy against the European project incredibly dangerous?
It is very dangerous, especially when it is a form of fake democracy. I'm not referring for the time being to Italy, but if you think of the referendum that Tsipras put up in order to get consensus at home, to be so tough in Brussels as to Prometheus breaking down the chains, well, they backed him in the referendum, but 2 days later he said, no, I will use your strong support to be now finally a better pupil of the Euro system. So that was a pure fallacy of democracy, but not of European democracy, of national democracy, because the Greek people was cheated, I believe for a good reason, but played out too cynically to be acceptable.
Let's turn very briefly then to the bigger scene abroad. Will France and Germany agree on further fundamental reforms of the Eurozone and of the EU?
I'm now less optimistic than I was 6 months ago or so, because there is an asynchrony there. I think as Gideon Rachman put it very nicely a few days ago, also more generally, not just the Franco-German relationship, but Macron is a uniquely strong leader riding in a phase where the ideals that he champions with great courage, liberalism, is coming out of fashion, one should say, in this context. No, I'm a bit concerned because we finally have France back, but we probably don't have Germany there anymore in terms of willingness to improve the European construction. It's a timid Germany. And so, by the way, this would greatly enhance the role of Italy if we had at the table an Italy not so catastrophic vis-à-vis the Eurozone as to suggest its liquidation, but fighting in coordination with France for a better architecture of it. This might still come out in the end. Doesn't look very probable now. At any rate, as I think we discussed on other occasions, I do not believe that the French have the real priorities right. They put a lot of emphasis on institutional things. The finance minister for the euro area and the budget for the euro area. I believe that what should get the absolute priority is something that could reduce the huge mutual mistrust that we have now in Europe between North and South in economic matters, and East-West in more existential and democratic matters. So I think rather than continuing this rather sophisticated discussion between the pace of risk reduction and the pace of risk, what is the complement, risk sharing. I think this is the moment to make the rules about the Stability Pact more serious, closer to reality, and carve out a decently wide place in those for public investment, which would support, sustain global demand in Europe without the artificial in the long term modality of unlimited supply of liquidity at zero interest rates. I'm exaggerating a bit.
So fiscal policy, more fiscal policy, less monetary policy, brief. That will certainly be a big, big struggle with Germany in its current mood.
Yes, but Germany is extremely interesting because they are guided also to the benefit of the whole of Europe by structural principles, ordo liberalismus, a good constitution, etc. But in asserting that model, they become childishly short-termist on some occasions, not to give up 5% at the negotiating table in the short term, to be able to get back to Berlin to say that in the day by day they got 100% relative to their principles and ideals. They normally bring to decisions in the clash with others that further down the road go against them, their principle for 50, 60, 70%. For example, their adamant stubbornness against a somewhat more permissive fiscal stance at the EU level and at the level of member states has exactly brought them to have to swallow the enormous, bitter for them, pill of quantitative easing.
So, a couple more questions. You've got Brexit in the West, and you've got countries in Central and Eastern Europe which seem, how does one put this gently, to be not so convinced of what we consider liberal democratic norms. We have Mr. Putin out pretty unhappy about what's going on in Europe and not not entirely benign, one would suggest, in his intentions. How worried are you about the stability of Europe in the bigger picture, given these immense pressures? And then finally, and we'll come to that in the second question, we have an America which seems not merely indifferent to, but actually hostile to the whole European integration process, which it so strongly supported since after the war. I mean, these are incredibly powerful tectonic forces working on Europe. Are they going to pull it apart or, in the end, force it together?
And you benevolently forgot a minor but not irrelevant component, Turkey and Mr. Erdogan, which is an interesting complication to the scenario. Well, we always thought, since my first discussions with Lionel in Brussels 25 years ago, that Europe needs crisis in order to become more adult.
Then we're in great shape.
Yes, yes, we are in the potential of a great shape, and with the election of Macron, all the ingredients were there for a nouvelle cuisine of Europe. But much of whether we will cope with these challenges or not may seem very prosaic, depends on the negotiations beginning now on the 7-year budget of the European Union. Because if we continue to have a retrospective model of the EU with lots of expenditures devoted to noble purposes, but not really new noble purposes, like the common agricultural policy or the cohesion funds, then we will not be able to meet the new real needs of citizens today to protect them from scare, which, by the way, feeds the populist vote at home for everybody, which are migrations, terrorism, climate change. So there is a need of much more effective control of the common external border, of the common intelligence, etc., which requires powers transferred to the national level, to the EU level, whereas so many activities could in fact be either cancelled or devolved back to the member states, and requires resources. As for Mr. Trump, I was talking with the US ambassador to Rome the other day. I will not disclose the answer, but I believe I can disclose my question to him, which was the following. Now we are likely to see with this new government something that might be, alas, a bit closer to Mr. Orban, a bit closer to Mr. Farage. Are we to expect that this combination will bring the Italian government even closer to the heart of President Trump, because it cherishes those interlocutors in the EU? And is there any way in which we could keep our peace of mind of being friends to the US and friends to the EU, but not so friends to those in the EU who work against the EU? The answer was interesting.
And your answer? Difficult.
I would never dare to answer to an answer given to a question of mine.
So last word, and then we'll have a few questions. When you think about what's happened with Mr. Trump's America, do you take him seriously and literally in the famous phrase. Some people suggested that enemies took him literally but not seriously, and supporters took him seriously but not literally. But one of our columnists has suggested he should be taken both seriously and literally, which is, to me, pretty scary. Do you take him seriously and literally? Are we going to have a huge trade war between China, or is he actually going to fix the Korean problem? Who knows?
Who knows? He's not compelled, at least he believes he is not compelled by the law of logical consistency, which we most mortals erroneously assume to be quite a strong constraint. Empirically, it seems to be the case by now that we can say that the rate of fulfillment of his electoral promises is dangerously high.
I was reminded when you said that there's a famous American thinker said that a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. From this point of view, obviously, Mr. Trump is not a little mind.
No.
So, question.
It's only a little ego, but not a little mind.
Does anybody have any questions that arise from our discussion on the economy, geopolitics, the future of Europe, the future of Italy? Will the Eurozone still be around 5 years from now? Or any of the other things that have arisen from our discussion? Or are you also?
There are questions down there. One of them,
yes.
I'm not able really to read.
Okay, the first question is, are you coming back into politics?
That was the one which I wasn't able to read.
Okay. Okay. I think you can interpret it. So what do you think about the mini-bots proposal?
I'm sure that everybody here knows fully what a mini-bot is. The gist of it is that it's a small security, a small bond expressing a debt of the state, being so small in value that it would be a rather discrete substitute, almost substitute to currency.
It's a parallel money, essentially, isn't it?
Yes.
Which can be used in payment of state, of debt, of tax debts, and therefore clearly has value.
He is the economist. But he would go on saying that therefore those who believed until today that they were the sole issuers of money in the Eurozone might be a bit disconcerted.
They would probably conclude that this is incompatible with the Maastricht Treaty. What do they do then to a government that is in violation of the treaty?
Well, I think this would hurt more than say, an excessive deficit, because it might impinge on the perception of respect of their competences to those who run the ECB.
But presumably the crisis would take the following form. If this happened, somebody would take if they concluded that someone would take the Italian government to the European Court of Justice, saying that it is acting ultra vires. And the European Court of Justice would probably agree. Well, I mean, predicting lawyers is always tricky, but that's what I assume they would do. And then you would have a massive constitutional clash. What would the Italian government do?
Well, it's not new that there are constitutional clashes. When you say presumably somebody would bring the Italian government to the court, that somebody would have most likely to be the European Commission.
Yes.
So the confrontation would be very, very early on.
Yeah, it would be the Commission.
Because the court is an august body fundamental to the European integration process, necessarily is not particularly speedy in its functioning, so that might take 3 years. So, but you know, I remember when I was Commissioner for Financial Services, we had a strong clash with the Austrian government at the time because of the Sparbuchern, so the savings, books, which were anonymous, which were, we thought, in violation of the laws against recycling of money. And so we brought to the court Austria. The Austrian government was all delighted by that because they recognized that was an archaic financial instrument they should get rid of. There were 20 million such accounts for 8 million Austrians, but it was so enshrined in the Austrian culture, especially because it helped smooth the financing of situations around families which were not so completely orthodox. So it would have been a huge political cost for the government to get rid of them, much better to be defeated by the Court of Justice.
Well, we'll see whether your government will feel the same if it introduced the mini-bot proposal. Now, a couple of other questions. At what level do you think interest rates will become a really big problem for Italy?
Well, given my experience, the present level seems totally reassuring, pretty dull and insignificant. Now we are a bit alarmed because the spread went up a bit, and we are now at 173. It was almost 600 in those days. Certainly the reduction in interest rates on Italian treasury bonds, which is there after 2012, 2013, which was due first to the domestic measures, then to the QE, has massively reduced the expenditure of the government. So if only, for example, if only there was a doubling of the present interest rates, the space for the satisfaction of those requests of the two parties, the flat tax or the citizenship income, etc., would be further reduced. So the political realities would become more tight.
And the question here that I like is, do you think Italian companies should be taking measures to deal with the risk, the possibility that Italy would leave the euro? Or should they ignore that possibility altogether?
They might, for example, decide to shift their headquarters, say, to Catalonia. No, seriously. I don't think the Italian system as a whole, establishment, newcomers, European authorities, President of the Republic, Bank of Italy, would make it very easy to have a great drift of that sort. By the way, what I suggest to the two populists when I have a chance is to say, you have two targets, the Italian establishment and the European Union. Try to focus your fire mostly on the Italian establishment, which, in my view, needs to receive great pressures to become more modern, open to competition, less dependent on state aid, less cozy in its directorship relations, and try to understand that if you do these things to modernize the country, to make it more competitive, the EU would be on your side will not be your enemy.
I think I'm supposed to stop now. I apologize to all those who had fascinating questions we haven't got to. But I think this has been a very interesting conversation about where we are. As I sort of expected, Mario is suggesting that in the end, it'll all be all right. Italy works in mysterious ways, but somehow or other, it'll always end up all right because the alternatives are simply too scary and ultimately too inconceivable to happen. I would only point out that 5 years ago, I thought much the same about Brexit. Now, of course, the British are probably more stubborn and foolish than the Italians, but we shall see.
Well, Brexit was enormously beneficial.
To Italy and Europe.
To everybody with eyes and ears, because it is being an immense lesson, an immense practical exercise in what direct democracy conducted by a particularly cynical head of government could do.
Yes, and I also tend to add that, which so far has been true, that one of the, and this is really my last mark, the great strategic effort of the United Kingdom as a country over 400 years was to keep Europe divided. And we have finally succeeded in uniting Europe, unfortunately against us. Mario, thank you very much for this very interesting conversation.
And now we're going to move on to a session moderated by Jo Ellison, our fashion editor and the driving force behind the content at this conference. So can I welcome Jo and her panel to the stage? Thank you.
Emmanuel, je vous donne tout. Do you want me to go? No.
Morning, everyone. Hi. Apparently, we've been told to keep it upbeat. It's all been a bit too doom and gloom recently, so we're hoping to bring the lulls now. If my panel are coming.
Okay.
Hey, come on. Come on. Maybe I should introduce them to the stage like in a pageant. And here we have Marie-Claire Devaux. She's the Chief Sustainability Officer and Head of International Affairs at Kering. Round of applause.
Bueno.
She'll be followed by Gabriela Hearst, who's founder and creative director of Gabriela Hearst, their fashion label. We have Sebastian Bado, International Director of Luxury and Fashion at Alibaba. And lastly, but not leastly, Edgar Huber, who is Global President of Coty Luxury. Thank you, guys. Do you want to sit down? So we've got a really, really broad range of expertise on the stage here, and we've got totally sort of different interests, markets, sort of models of business and structures. So really what I wanted to do is it's an umbrella panel really talking about smart luxury and what in terms of the kind of new disrupted landscape, what brands are doing and what you're doing within the work that the realm that you're working in that is smart. So I think I'll start with you, Marie-Claire. As the sustainability officer at Kering, a huge brand, huge portfolio, lots of brands to consider, lots of different sort of sustainability directives. What does it mean for Kering to have embraced this in some sort of like deep and meaningful manner? I mean, I think Catherine probably was slightly dismissive of what brands were doing, but I'd like you to sort of like a right to reply, maybe, on what you're doing.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. What I can say first, I think really sustainability is key for luxury. So now, if we are speaking at the level of Kering, François-Henri Pinault, our CEO and chairman, thinks really that sustainability is good for ethics reasons, but it's also good for business reasons. We can say that sustainability makes good business sense. And why? Because we think that if you are thinking about the most important issue of our century, loss of biodiversity, climate change, resource scarcity, if we want to tackle this kind of issue, it's not an option, it's really a necessity to implement sustainability. Before going into details for Kering, I think also as a luxury player, I believe we have a leading role, because you know when you are in luxury, you set the trends. So it's also very key to show that you can be successful in the business and at the same time to pay attention to people and to the planet. So that's why we think really that we have this specific responsibility. So now to answer your question, but I think it's important to share with you the framework, we are very pragmatic. We have the vision from our chairman and CEO who wants to be sure that Kering will be the leader in the sustainability field.
And when you say sustainability,
when I say sustainability, to make the links with what we are doing, last year we announced a new chapter in our sustainability journey, and it was with a 360 approach. So we have an holistic approach. It means that we have our new strategy based on 3 pillars. First, it's about the environmental side, and it's called CARE.
Say that again.
CARE.
Care.
Okay, and it's how we want to reduce by 40% our environmental footprint in our own operations, but also in our entire supply chain. We want to reduce by 50% our greenhouse gas emission to make the link with climate change.
Yep.
And we want also, and I think it's important to underline with this audience today, we want to push animal welfare, because we think also we have this responsibility to take into account animal welfare and perhaps to push this topic a little bit more. After, we have the second pillar called Collaborate. It's about people working inside the Kering Group, but also outside, so in our supply chain. And we want to focus on gender parity, to fill the gap between salary, but also to preserve craftsmanship, because in luxury it's key, and also to work closely with our suppliers. So it means to be sure that we have the highest working condition applied in the supply chain, but also to do with them capacity building, because we think that it's important for the future. And the last pillar, I love the last pillar, it's about how we can create new business models. So it's really linked with innovation.
Yep.
So based on our experience, we created in 2013 a material innovation lab. It was dedicated to fabric and textile. We want to do the same for watches and jewelry.
Yep.
It's also how we can work with startups, because we think that to tackle our issue, we need disruptive innovations. So without startup, we won't be able to do it. But it's also how to educate the next generation of designers. That's why we have specific partnership, for example, with the London College of Fashion in UK, with Tsinghua University in Beijing. So we try all over the world to develop this kind of commitment and really to say, next generation, you have the responsibility to change the things. And my last word, I will say to complete link with the next generation, is the fact that when you are speaking about sustainability in our sector, it's not doing one-off collections, but it's really about embedded sustainability into the entire supply chain. So at the end of the day, automatically, you have sustainability embedded in your products. So it's our way of thinking.
I mean, I'm going to move on in a second, but I mean, obviously, great plan sounds phenomenal. You could save the world. It's sort of pan-global. It's talking to people outside of Kering. You've come from the public sector, though, and you're now working in luxury. How's the transition? And is it more responsive, less responsive? I mean, you started in 2012.
Yes.
How's that changed in the last, say, 6 years? Have you noticed that there's an increased enthusiasm, or do you have to keep banging the door?
So for the first part of your question, I tried to do my best when I was in the public sector, and I try also to do my best. I don't know, you can have a feedback for caring in sustainability in the private sector. I think, of course, it's different, but what I would like to underline when we are speaking about public and private sector, they have to work really together.
Yeah.
Because you can't do anything with the business leaders involved in the sustainability field. Above all, when we are thinking about climate change, it's a global issue, so you need the commitment of the state, the commitment of the governments, but also concrete action from the business side. But to answer the second part of your question, I think now everyone agrees about the fact that sustainability is key. When I say everyone, perhaps not 100%, but the huge majority of people, everywhere you go, they have understood that climate change or loss of biodiversity, it's a key issue. Why? Because first, they make the link with the impacts on their health. If we are thinking not only in Western countries, but also, for example, in China mainland, when you have a look about what the Chinese government decided a few months ago, they put really the environmental side as a key priority. So I think it's a great signal. When you saw what happened now a few years ago with the COP21, it was not only a commitment from the states, but also a huge commitment from business leaders, so I think it's key. After, I am optimistic. So I will say, because if you are not optimistic, you don't work on the sustainability side, I can tell you. But I think the things are changing. After, it's a question of speed. Because we have also to imagine, when you are speaking about climate change or loss of biodiversity, it's not for the next centuries. We are speaking for the next year. So what I would like is to engage our colleagues in the different kind of industry, but above all in the textile industry, to be very aware about this issue and together to find solutions. So that's why also, as caring, I don't say that what we are doing is perfect now, of course, but we think also in responsibility in front of companies who are less big than us, we open source all our methodologies. So, for example, we did it for our environmental profit and loss account. We did it in January 2018 for our caring standards, because we think that it could be useful for the company to apply sustainability criteria and not spending time and money to identify what does it mean on their daily work.
Yeah. Gabriella, I mean, it leads us nicely to you, because obviously you've launched your brand in 2015. It's branded, your own terminology is honest luxury, and obviously there's a huge kind of sustainability drive within it. But also in terms of the means of manufacture, I mean, you own the sheep that make the wool. It's a very kind of traditional model, really. When you were, what precipitated you to decide to launch another fashion brand in a world already kind of like saturated with luxury brands?
Well, actually, it's that exactly that point that my previous experience, I wanted to create something that, and I thought long about this, because I do have another day job as a rancher, but it's, you know, grass-fed, organic cattle and merino sheep producing that my family have done for 6 generations. So I really wanted to transport those values into fashion. And the only way for me to launch a business was having the sustainability in mind, because it is as, and I have felt it even as an independent up-and-coming brand, what you said, every time that we have applied sustainable practices and long-term view, meaning making sure that you're not oversaturation in your image, and it's always been a successful business choice. So that keeps me very positive, because I know if it's a successful business choice, others will follow.
Well, you were just saying backstage, I mean, I think the thing is with anything which has a kind of big umbrella term sort of over it, it can be so overwhelming that brands, you know, where do they begin? Who do they start with? What do you look at first? Do you look at packaging? Do you look at like CO2 emissions? So from your point of view, you said it's about asking questions?
Sometimes it's as simple as asking the question, and I always have these, when I tell other people, it's like sustainability is a practice, and like any practice, it's hard at the beginning, but then when you start to see the rewards, you become much more engaged and very curious, and of course, for me, it's a bit easier to make those questions because I'm very passionate about it in my personal life, but it's really that simple, just asking. Ask your suppliers, your manufacturer, especially when you're an independent brand that you don't have as much access or pull. It's really, really, really important to just ask.
Ask, and also, I mean, I think the other kind of obstacle in most people's minds to sustainability is the additional costs. I mean, do you find that actually just doing things kind of with an ecological kind of point of view or trying to make them greener is significantly more expensive, and how do you kind of negotiate that?
Well, to give you the specific point of, we use TIPA packaging, which is a compostable, flexible packaging to ship our, right now we're implementing it in all our knitwear, and so it composts in 24 weeks versus 500 years. And right now the price of a TIPA packaging is 2 times and a half from the point if we would be using regular flexible packaging, but plastic. But I think that for a luxury brand, of course, this is not so much of an issue because of the price point. But at the same time, it's it's an investment in the future. So and then when more people start using it,
it takes off. I mean, I think you need to be pioneers. It's like you were saying, it's like you have to lead for others to follow, but nevertheless, I think there is an obstacle. Sebastian, when we were on the phone the other day, you said that you are obviously, with Alibaba, sort of looking after a consumer base of about 670 million consumers. Within the next 10 years, 44% of all luxury will be bought by Chinese consumers. In 7 years. Do Chinese people care about sustainability? I mean, I'm just thinking smart luxury to me means get into Asia. Like, who cares about anything else? They let it all burn. I mean, obviously not. But I mean, how do you balance what's the consumer in Asia doing? How are they reacting? Do they care about environmental issues?
So I think what's really interesting is, so it's 7 years, 44%. I think it'll be 50 within the next 10.
Well, it's currently 33, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it'll be half of the luxury sales will be coming from Chinese consumers. So clearly, it's a very, very important market. What I think is very important is to understand is that this is driven mostly by millennials. So it's really the young people that are driving this luxury consumption, which makes it complicated and complex because we don't really know how they're going to be behaving in the future. They're not. They're 15 years younger than the average American consumer and 10 years younger than the European consumer. So when you're talking to a 45-year-old in the US, you're talking to a 25-year-old in China, so you can't talk the same way, you can't use the same communication channels.
And in terms of what they already know in terms of their kind of deeper luxury understanding of brands, I mean, have they become incredibly literate very, very quickly, or are they still kind of catching up, or how would you describe it?
They learn very, very fast.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, but just going back to the sustainability factor, I think clearly they do care. The millennials do care. It's very important to them. The fact that the government is also pushing is also part of that. You were talking about the COP21 where Jack Ma, business leader, was also present. So they do care. It's very important to them, I think. And clearly going back to the way that brands can engage with them, talking about how the positioning that they will have, and if you take your example that you were talking about just earlier, that can have an impact on the way that they're going to see the brand and they're going to want to interact with it. So I think it is key. It is complicated because the difference is that you can't talk to them the same way, and next to that, you also don't know how they're going to behave in the future. But that's where I think, partnering with technological platform and doing innovation and everything, I think the key message is the fact that innovation more and more is coming from China. It used to come maybe from the West, and now it's coming more and more from the East.
I mean, so we're looking at a client that's like typically 20 years younger than the kind of traditional luxury client. We're looking at someone who's young. We're looking at someone who's quite well informed. What actually are they buying though?
They learn very, very fast. Absolutely. Yeah. I think clearly they do care. The millennials do care. It's very important to them. The fact that the government is also pushing is also part of that. You were talking about the COP21 where Jack Ma, business leader, was also present. So it's really the they're really buying everywhere across the board. You were asking about their knowledge of luxury brands and brands as a whole. Like 10 years ago, and it went really quickly. 10 years ago, they didn't know that many brands. Today, if you ask your average Chinese consumer to name cosmetics brands, they'll name 50% more than an American consumer. So they know 20 cosmetics brands when an American consumer only knows like 12.
And how's this all been communicated to them? I mean, how is where's the dialogue?
So I think it happens mostly on their phone.
Right.
I think that's where, you know, right today, 92% of our sales on our platform comes from the mobile phone. I think in Europe it's about 20%. 92% on 11/11 were done.
Hang
with
on, it went
phones.
up by 2% in that last 3 seconds. So you say 90 and then 92?
92. It's 92,
Yeah.
and the reality is that in China has really leapfrogged the West in terms of usage and e-commerce, in terms of fluidity of payments, and in terms of ways that consumers engage with brands. And clearly, they do all their engagement or their first engagement through social platforms, through e-commerce platforms. Social and commerce are really married together also there, which is very different from in the West where social and commerce are totally separated.
Do you think that trend will come back to the West? I mean, increasingly, I think we're getting shoppable functions. We're getting app platforms that we can use and we can shop from. Is that something that is just going to become? Oh, are we going to become like omni-channel in all senses everywhere?
So I think what is going to happen. So clearly, more and more social platforms are trying to integrate commerce, and then we'll see how a commerce platform integrates social as well. But clearly, this is something that will happen down the line. What I think is very, very interesting, and we can talk a little about, is the link between the first interaction is through the phone, but then there's a lot of interactions that happen also through sharing, through social platforms, and then through stores. And the fact that the store is really important in the luxury space is also very important for the Chinese consumer. They want to have that specific experience, whether they do it in China or when they travel abroad as well. So also that link and that line between online and offline is getting more and more erased, if you will. And what we're talking about today and what we're thinking about is creating this, what we call new retail, where it doesn't really matter what channel you're engaging with your consumer, and you can really just focus on the engagement and not just the channel.
Yeah. I mean, Edgar, we were talking last night. You said the biggest change to the cosmetic industry had also been the mobile phone because of the selfie, and it just changed the way that everyone looks at themselves, quite literally. I mean, at Coty, you're looking after a kind of huge diversity of brands as well. What do you think is the key? What do you think is the key sort of obsession within the industry? Where do you think the beauty industry is going when it's going in the right direction at the moment?
No, I mean, the selfie trend definitely completely regenerated the growth of color cosmetics. And younger generations have taken more photos of themselves than we have taken in our whole life.
Well, probably yesterday. More pictures than most people.
One day, probably.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something which has completely reinvigorated the color cosmetics. But what we see today is really that the new way of luxury and the smart luxury, which is inclusive, which is socially engaged, which is completely transparent and honest, is something that completely has driven the new categories also in fragrances, but also in skincare and also in color cosmetics. So to this new approach of being inclusive, not being too snobbish and not achievable, has completely changed the overall growth in our industry, and especially for some of the Kering brands in particular, for us has really opened new ways of approaching customers. What we also do with Tmall and new platforms, which allows us to really grow the business significantly.
Yeah, and you were saying, like, I mean, if a brand isn't considering inclusivity or the idea of diversity or global, I mean, in beauty anyway, the business has always been quite regionally specific, or it's needed to be very localized according to the market you're in. How like, can you give me a couple of examples of a brand that's really sort of like ahead of the pack in that terms, and like whether all markets are looking for the same kind of ethos? I mean, I presume some brands. Does the brands that are doing successfully do successfully everywhere immediately, or is there a certain amount of education or learning or change of behaviors that need to happen as well?
I mean, we have recently launched a new fragrance for Gucci, which is Gucci Bloom, which was an instant success everywhere and immediately. And usually that's not the case in the fragrance industry, because fragrance taste of the juice is very different between continents, in the Middle East versus Asia versus North America or Europe. But this one just went in the top 10 everywhere, immediately, whatever usually the taste preferences are, there was no difference. And I'm strongly convinced that the complete integrated approach we have chosen from a social media point of view.
So it's about engagement. I mean, as you were saying before, it's about engagement.
Absolutely.
So it's about the fact that it's not necessarily what the perfume smells like.
Well, you need it for the repurchase. So.
It's an excellent marketing exercise. But I think, I mean, to talk to engagement about sustainability, I mean, that I imagine is the only way you're going to get any kind of momentum going for any product or for any kind of strategy. Have you kind of worked a digital platform into the way that you're trying to communicate your message? I mean, how do you engage a 25-year-old Chinese person living in Shanghai with carrying sustainability kind of progress?
First, I fully agree with the fact that the millennials and also the following generations are really asking more and more questions about sustainability.
I always say that, but then like you think 2 years later, do they still? Like they might do it then, but will they continue to do that?
What I can say, we don't have quantitative data about the topic. So perhaps you have this kind of data, but at the level of Kering, we don't have it. But when you speak with people inside the boutiques, and again, all over the world, so it means in Singapore, in China mainland, but also in United States, the people inside the boutique say that they have more and more questions. So people don't use the word sustainability, but they ask you questions about where this kind of raw materials are coming from. Could you tell me more about the precious skins? Speak about animal welfare. So it's this kind of thing. What we are doing at the level of the group and at the level of the corporate, we put a lot of information about what we are doing in the sustainability field. So always linked with the environmental side, the social side, and innovation. After, it's really the choice of the brands to communicate directly or not with their clients and with their customers. So what I can see, but it's more, I will say, what I see today, the brands have more corporate communication to have this kind of discussion with their clients. But after, for example, if Gucci or Bottega Veneta or other brands would like to communicate more directly and to do marketing with their customer, of course they can, but it's really under their choice and under their responsibility. But what we think at the level of the group, we think really when you are speaking about clients which are buying luxury products, for them, sustainability, it's really inherent to the quality, it's inherent to the DNA of the product. So they buy savoir-faire, they buy heritage, and at the same time, they buy the fact that you pay attention to the planet and you pay attention to the people. So it's really
something that's on a kind of checklist.
Yes, it's in the skeleton of your product, it's the DNA of the products. You can show the words as you want, but the reality, for them, it's really inherent to the quality. So that's why we are also speaking that it's good for ethics reasons, but it's also good for business reasons, because clients are respecting that. They can't imagine buying a luxury products and at the same time you didn't pay attention about what is happening in your supply chain. You imagine, it's incredible.
I mean, Gabriele, sorry, I'm going to just quickly, because obviously 50% of your business is done directly through your web, like through your website, or
this is really non-common sense of the way. I'm still surprised of how it works, but people put themselves in a waiting.
But you've obviously had a very sort of tight control over that, and you can be answerable to the people that are coming to you. So how important has that been for you in terms of?
I think first of all, we learn much more about our consumer, and I think that it was a sustainable choice that made us go through that path, because I remember when we started to get a lot of traction with our handbags, everything about our handbag model is completely different to anything else. And so when we started to see traction, my head of sales showed me a wholesale plan, and I realized that A, it was not good for a long-term view, and B, it was I had to produce double the amount of handbags, meaning natural resources, to make the same amount of money. So it was my common sense was like, no, I think we'll just keep the communication for when we open our own retail store, and that's where we're doing in November.
Sebastian, sorry, what did you wanted to?
No, I just want to talk, because we're talking about the data piece. Do we have data knowing that like millennials care about sustainability? And I think we don't right now because we've launched our luxury pavilion only a few months back. But I think what's going to be very interesting is that one day one of the brands, maybe one of the Kering brands, I would love that, will decide to communicate to consumers about sustainability, and it'll be like one of the ways that they'll engage with consumers, and we'll be able to see and compare it with brands who don't do it to see the positive impact that it may have. And what we're able to get is that insights, and so far nobody's done it out of the 40 brands, nobody's like pushed on that, but at some point somebody will, and it'll be interesting to see how customers react.
I mean, Edgar, I want to kind of go back to a slightly different subject, which is as the sort of at Coty, you're like representing the interests of lots of people. I feel as though when I started in this conference sort of 5 years ago or so, 4 years ago, there was kind of an antipathy at the time towards licensing. Like everyone was kind of going in-house. It was all very much about the single creative focus. So people were kind of reluctant to embrace partnerships. It seemed a bit unfashionable, and I feel as though that has changed quite significantly in the last 5 years. Would you say, have brands sort of come back to you on bended knee going, sorry, we actually had no idea what we were doing, you need to help us?
Well, first of all, we are not developing anything from a creative point of view which would not be completely in line with the fashion houses. So we are working very, very closely, because today brands have to be completely integrated, and brands have to be also totally integrated when they communicate with consumers, and also when they communicate about sustainability, about social engagement, about inclusivity. So everything has to be one. So we consider ourselves today as to be the experts in beauty to complement the expertise of the fashion houses and help them to develop the beauty business, because we have the expertise in this area, but we are not doing it in a way that we would not completely integrate all the creative developments and also sustainability developments and distribution choices like platform choices with the fashion houses and go together.
And Sebastian, I mean, how do you find working with brands? And presumably a lot of the people also tried to get into Asia without any help or without any partnerships. That's pretty much been eradicated as an option, hasn't it?
I mean, I think what's important is to work on each other's strength, right? We clearly have a strength of having 670 million people, but also like technology and innovation that we're able to do that would take brands a long time to also develop in-house. So the idea is that, and I think it's really a philosophy because we're a marketplace model, to really think that we have two customers, right? One is the brand, and one is the end consumer. And we're just a technology play that will help facilitate the link between the two. And what I find really interesting is that in everything that we build, we think about both. The luxury pavilion was built based on discussions that we've had with luxury brands and based on what they wanted. And it's a continuing process, right? So based on insight that we get from the way that end customers engage with the platform, and then based on insights that we get from the brands telling us, hey, we'd really love to have this product to do better CRM or this product to do better distribution. So I think it's a really interesting process. We learn from each other on a daily basis, and I think that's how we're going to be able to build what I think could be tomorrow's luxury, because outside of the 50%, the market, just the way that the consumers engage is so different, and the technology that we have in place is also so different that we're able to do things in China that I don't think we'll be able to do in Europe for a little while. So I think we're really trying to build what tomorrow's luxury sales and consumer experience is going to be, and it will definitely have an impact in Europe and in the US in the future.
There's lots of questions here, so I want to kind of try and have an opportunity to look at some of them. But I was going to ask you all individually about the thing that you find, the challenge in sort of maybe sustainability or just maybe in the business that you are the most preoccupied by at the moment. Like what for you is the most sort of urgent thing to address in terms of what you're doing at Kering?
I think what it's important, and not only for Kering, because Kering, we are not working alone. And I think what it's key, it's really to change. If we want to change the paradigm, we need to involve the ecosystem. So it's really to change the mindset, to be sure that not only everyone is conscious about the sustainability issue, but they want to act, and as I said, to act very quickly. So it's really to push, to push, to push.
So your most urgent thing is urgency.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Time is ticking.
Yes, exactly.
So you're not like, I mean, because I just imagine, you know, one day it must be faux fur. Oh my God, we're filling the ocean with microfibers. It's worse than real fur. Like then the next day it could be leather. We need to do something about leather and tannery and like dyeing and like, I mean, how do you stop from like just like, oh my God?
No, I think, and thanks also to our people inside the brands and inside the corporate, we have many experts. So experts really on the environmental side that are coming from different kind of industry, but also based on our experience. Again, I don't say that it's perfect, but we have a clear action plan. We have our quantitative targets. Every brand has its own action plans because, of course, the issue are not the same if you are Gucci or Boucheron. So you have to tackle really and to be very operational and concrete. After, sometimes where it's difficult, it's to find innovations. For example, when I said we want to reduce by 40%, we know today how to reduce by 20%. Okay? But if we want to have, in addition, 20% to reach our target, we need disruptive innovations. So we need to find new solutions. So it's also working with university expert NGOs. And when you have the innovation, to be sure that it's viable economically, of course, but also at the end of the day, you will have the same standard of quality because you are in luxury. So of course it's challenging, but I think when you want, and when you have the commitment from the top management, it's really something possible. And where it's very important, it's to be clear about your journey. It's also the fact that you admit you need time. So because you need time, you have to go very quickly and to push on daily basis the boundaries.
Gabriella, how about you?
For me, the most urgent thing for me is plastic. Because 9% of it gets recycled and everything else is in the landfills, and there's not a real plan of how to get rid of plastic, and it's just inundating the whole world. I mean, and I've seen it I grew up in nature, surrounded by vast amounts, and I go to Uruguay, and in the rivers there's plastic. I was in Kenya, in the middle of nowhere, when to see the drought, there's plastic. I mean, I think that for me is the most urgent thing to address.
And you've done that in are you plastic free yet? Or?
No, next year is is April. So you can hold me accountable. Because that's the other thing. It's sustainability plus accountability.
Accountability, exactly. Sebastian?
So I mean, on the sustainability aspect, we don't manufacture anything, but we do push through logistics and supply chain and packaging and everything to try to go towards that, even though it's the brands that decide the way that they do that. But then in my day job, my main thing is around, I guess, some kind of cultural translation and in two ways, right? To go from a traditional business to something that's more digitalized, and in luxury it's a challenge because I think it took a while for the industry to kind of adopt the digital space, and there's still some issues there, and then China as well, which is obviously a huge opportunity, but culturally a challenge, and understanding those millennials. And I think that, you know, having the insights that we have, we can really be like an amazing partner for these brands. So to me, it's about those three different types of cultural translations, my main focus.
And Edgar?
Well, you know, as the worldwide leader in our space, we are by far the biggest consumer of glass.
Biggest consumer of glass.
Glass. And so our clear target is that we have a complete circular supply chain by 2023, 2025.
Great.
And the quality of recycled glass gets so good that we are very confident to get there.
Also, do you think, I mean, is quality still something that still kind of obsesses the consumer? Like, they absolutely won't compromise if they just know it's a little bit better for the world?
There's still a significant difference, so we have to work on
that. A lot of heads shaking very vigorously. It has to look as good as. Right, let's do a bit of a potluck on the question. So we've got, since sustainability is a very new concept in the luxury world, is Kering taking reference? Whoa, it's disappeared. Hello. Where's that gone?
It's the first.
Oh, there we go, sorry. Taking reference from other industries that might be more mature in this area. I mean, I think this is probably something that speaks to all of you. Like, who do you look to? Who are your green idols?
First, to find innovative solutions, you have to work with different kind of industry. To give you a concrete example, to reduce greenhouse gas that are cattle farming, okay, because in farming as the most important greenhouse gas when we are thinking for a luxury company, it's not obvious, but it's the case. So you have to work with the food industry.
Yeah.
So you can imagine also that it's a lot of change management inside the company, because to go to see a designer and to say we will have to work with the food industry, it's not also obvious. Chemical, because you answer about plastic, for example, but now we start to be PVC free in 2016. So we had a lot of work, but we are also working now with the chemical industry, because I think really chemicals, it's a huge issue. So we are working very closely also with them. So again, depending on the topic, we try really to work with automotive industry, food industry, chemical industry. So we are very open, and also startup, because again, it's not only to make incremental progresses, but it's really to find disruptive innovation, like how we can do color for dyeing based on microorganisms, how we can do laser in labs. So,
and is everyone quite receptive to the conversation? Is everyone kind of on board?
Yes, again, I think, and it's what makes the difference in comparison with a few years ago. Most of the people are really conscious that we have some issue and we have to tackle this issue. So we have also to work together, and if we work together, we can find solution. But sustainability, it's about transparency, it's about collaboration. Without these two items, I think we won't be able to change the paradigm.
Also, just one tiny thing. Plastic is one of the most searched for terms in terms of trends this season. Do you not go around with a ruler and just rap everyone on the knuckles and say, I mean, what are you doing? I mean, that's such a sort of mixed message, impossible to navigate.
That's why I think if we want to change a thing, sustainability, and above all in fashion, doesn't need to be a constraint. But every time you have to find the right solution and the right technical solutions to be without any compromise about the quality, because I think it's a starting point.
Yeah.
Of course, after to be trendy, and at the same time and at the same level to pay attention to the planet. So you can also find innovative solutions and some solutions. So take the example of PVC.
Yeah.
We were able to use other kind of materials.
How does Alibaba work with luxury brands to respond to the challenge of people buying counterfeit goods?
So, I mean, no, it's a great question. It's an important one. First thing is, on the luxury pavilion, we don't have that problem because only brands can sell to consumers. So consumers know that they're buying from the brands, and brands know that they're selling, obviously, products that are good. But we have a zero tolerance policy on counterfeit, and we work very closely with brands. Kering being one of them, but not only. We have 1,100 brands in our program that we work with. We work with governments because counterfeit can be sold online, but they're manufactured physically somewhere, and so we go with governments to go after counterfeiters and put them in jail, and we've done that many times in China in the past year. And then and then technology, because we have technology to be able to see where potentially people, because counterfeiters, when you close the window, they try to go. When you close the door, they try to go through the window. So we try to, make sure that we build the best technology to make sure that when somebody's trying to go through the window, we close the window as well. It's a complex, it's a really complex thing. I think we've made major strides in the past few years. It's not 100% done, and might never be, but we work very hard on getting rid of it.
I mean, Gabriele, you told me you were pretty hot on fake. You've been very proactive. The handbags have been kind of particularly vulnerable, and especially the Nina bag, which even though you've distributed it like from your own site? Like when people have been able to get their hands on it?
When we secure the law firm that represents us in China, they've never seen a case of a bag just being launched and being counterfeited so fast. So I guess that's a compliment. But you're freaking out because you're working on the distribution so much. And but it is a real problem. So now we're actually using technology and developing a chip that goes into the security cards that's on paper and not on plastic inside of the bags. But yes, it's a real problem, and we're sending cease and desist. And I'm happy that Alibaba is chasing down the factories that's doing this.
I mean, the same for Coty. I mean, how does Coty?
Yeah, we do not really have a problem of fake or counterfeit, but we do have a huge problem of grey market.
Yeah.
And working directly with Amazon, especially in the US, but also now with Tmall, allows us to clean up completely and dry out the grey market, because what you do is that when you work with them proactively, they clean up so-called marketplace, which is the place where all the grey market products are sold, and they are very, very reactive and really very reliable partners to us to clean up the grey market, focus on doing direct business.
Yeah.
Blockchain will probably help also down the line.
Which one?
Blockchain technology will probably help in the luxury industry to be able to follow what the products are, right? And
I mean,
we're
this is,
working towards that.
yeah, we've got this
So
thing.
fast.
Do we believe in blockchain technology will change the way in sustainability is communicated to consumers? My goodness, guys, you're going to have to tongue twister questions. So I think we should end with this because we've run out of time. But what is blockchain technology? Sorry, I'm slightly ignorant of.
So basically, it's the way to you can input in a bag a chip that can't even be seen, and which says that this bag is actually real. And then when it gets transferred to somebody else, it will also say that. So
the provenance of something
exactly,
can be tracked,
and you'll be able to scan. And we actually have bought a company which isn't blockchain, which was similar, where you can scan with your phone and you can see if it's real or if it's fake. So I think what I mean as a whole, blockchain, but other technologies as well, will probably help also in dealing with that problem.
Ultimately, it sounds as though the biggest sort of challenge to sustainable is going to be how to make the phone greener, basically. It seems to be so instrumental to everything that's happening. So, and yet, the way it's produced is very, very suspicious. Anyway, that was a great panel. Thanks so much to everybody. Hopefully, you can all join us again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.